I'd like to begin the panel discussion today with Hilary Miller. Hilary is a policy analyst covering Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Houthi movement in Yemen. Before USERF, Hilary was research fellow for the UN Special Rapporteur of Freedom of Religion and Belief, also at UNESCO as a UNESCO liaison office in New York. Hilary previously lived in Geneva, working as a Morris B. Abram Fellow for United Nations Watch, an excellent group, by the way, excellent group, International Human Rights Advocacy Group, and she holds a BA in Political Science and History and Jewish Studies from the University of Wisconsin, go Badgers, and an MA in Human Rights Studies from Columbia University. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hilary Miller.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Gary, for that very kind introduction. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you, Coptic Solidarity. Thank you for including me again at this year's Policy Day. It's truly a pleasure to be here this morning with Gary and my esteemed co-panelists, Karmella and Jamileh, each of whom are fierce defenders of religious freedom and advocates for fundamental freedoms for all. My name is Hilary Miller, and I cover the Middle East, North Africa, and Gulf region as part of the professional staff at the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, better known to many in this room as USERF. We are an independent, bipartisan commission mandated by the U.S. Congress to monitor religious freedom conditions abroad based on international legal standards. We inform and advise Congress, the State Department, and the White House on how to better protect freedom of religion or belief internationally. I'm truly honored to speak here this morning in greater depth about the indigenous Jewish communities of the Middle East, a topic that is often neglected, downplayed, and serially under-discussed in the retelling of history of this part of the world. As a proud Jew, these remarks are deeply personal. I am the great-granddaughter of Jewish refugees who came to America from Latvia, Lithuania, Russia, and Poland, fleeing religious persecution. So in my home growing up, it was the European Jewish story of the 20th century, the tragic story of social ostracization, of systematic legal discrimination, of violent pogroms, and the culmination of it all leading to atrocity crimes and mass extermination that animated family conversation and still very much underpins my way of seeing the world. I mention this to make a larger point about the range of Jewish experience that unfolded in the middle of the 20th century, and to draw attention to the unique historical contours and conditions during this fraught period for the ancient Jewish communities of the Levant and of the Maghreb region. The presence of Jews in North Africa and the Middle East dates back over 2,500 years. For generations, Jews in this region were subjected to various forms of discrimination. Jews were treated as second-class citizens, and in line with historical precedent, these Jews were no strangers to systematic oppression and abuse, and vulnerable to periodic bouts of brutality and violence. Even still, against this backdrop, Jews were permitted, albeit with limitations, to go about their daily lives as Jews in the pursuit of religious, educational, and professional opportunities. Many Jews in this part of the world considered themselves loyal compatriots. They were proudly Syrian. They were proudly Egyptian. They were proudly Yemeni, Lebanese, Libyan, Moroccan, Tunisian, and Algerian. They were committed to the national cause, determined to contribute in meaningful ways to the cultural, social, political, and economic development of their respective countries. But sadly, this perception of inclusion and this feeling of embrace was fleeting. The status of Jews in the Middle East and North Africa changed dramatically just before, during, and after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. These Jews bore the brunt of an explosive combination of Arab nationalism, Nazi propaganda, and anti-Semitism. These events compounded long-standing patterns of discrimination and abuse that made life as a Jewish minority in this part of the world simply untenable. And so state-sanctioned repressive measures, coupled with violence, precipitated a mass displacement of Jews who were either forcibly uprooted from their homes or became subjugated political hostages of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And as these Jews fled en masse, their schools and shops were burned, their homes were looted and pillaged, their synagogues were desecrated, their assets were plundered. Entire communities which had existed for millennia, capitulated to this total legal and physical assault of the mid-20th century. And so this is the tragedy that befell the 150,000 Jews of Algeria, where fewer than 100 Jews live today. And this is the tragedy that befell the 20,000 Jews of Lebanon, where 20 Jews live today. And the tragedy that befell the 135,000 Jews of Iraq, where 4 Jews live today. And the 50,000 Jews of Syria, where no Jews live today. And the 38,000 Jews of Libya, where no Jews live today. That today most of these once flourishing indigenous Jewish communities can barely make a minyan, that being a quorum of minimum 10 Jewish adults necessary for communal prayer services and rituals, is beyond shame. It is beyond indignity. For time's sake, I will elaborate on contemporary Jewish life in 2 countries that I cover for USERF, Egypt and Yemen. At its height in the 1940s, the Jewish community of Egypt numbered at 80,000. 80,000. Today, there are fewer than 10 Jews residing between Alexandria and Cairo. And while the community size is a fraction of what it once was, the Egyptian government continues to actively promote or tolerate anti-Semitism. As USERF concluded in our 2025 annual report published in March, Egypt's restrictions on Jews and all other religious minorities remain systematic and ongoing. For this reason, we renewed our recommendation that the Secretary of State place Egypt on the State Department's special watch list. The conflict triggered by Hamas's October 7th terrorist attacks on Israel contributed to a marked rise in anti-Jewish sentiment in Egypt. For instance, in January 2024, an Egyptian book depicting anti-Semitic tropes and promoting ostensible Jewish plans to dominate the world was displayed at the state-run Cairo International Book Fair. Elected officials and state media outlets continue to invoke anti-Semitic canards and deliberately misrepresent the history of the Holocaust. And while the government has made some improvements to state curriculum, textbooks continue to grossly stereotype Jews as greedy swindlers engaged in finance and omit material on the Holocaust. USERF has welcomed President al-Sisi's restoration projects for historic Jewish houses of worship. Even so, Jewish leaders remain skeptical as to whether such overtures are genuine and if there are actual indications of progress on FORB. Bizarrely, no Jewish community members were invited to attend a government event marking the formal reopening of Cairo's historic Ben Ezra synagogue. And the Ministry of Culture has repeatedly denied requests to meet with local Jewish leaders concerning their ability to access historical community archives that remain in the government's possession. To be sure, discrimination as a religious minority in Egypt is not a uniquely Jewish problem. The Egyptian government continues to systematically discriminate against a range of faith communities, among them Copts, Baha'is, Ahmadis, and Jehovah's Witnesses. And the same applies to Yemen, where religious minority life in Houthi-controlled areas faces near total extinction. Houthi targeting of Baha'is, Christians, Jews, and non-religious persons has compelled many to flee Yemen entirely, seeking safety and refuge abroad. As we have done each year since 2019, USERV's 2025 annual report again designated the Houthi movement as an entity of particular concern for committing severe, ongoing, and systematic religious freedom violations. Today, from an ancient community nearly 2,000 years old, which at its peak numbered at 55,000 Jews, one Jew remains in Yemen. His name is Libby Marhabi, and he has languished in Houthi prison since 2016. His crime? Attempting to carry a Torah scroll from Yemen to Israel. Libby carries with him the historical weight of the Jews of Yemen, one of the world's oldest Jewish diasporic communities, singular in its distinct religious tradition, in its unique Hebrew dialect, and in its preservation of ancient practices. Heightened pressure during and after Israel's establishment led to the mass displacement of Yemen's Jews, and decades later, during their anti-government insurgency in the early 2000s, Houthi authorities deployed anti-Semitism as a political tool by inciting against the Jewish community, amounting to the destruction of Jewish homes and houses of worship, and defamation of Jews as eternal enemies of Islam, according to the group's religious interpretation. Jew hate became and still remains a staple of the Houthis' animating ethos. Their slogan reads, "Death to America, death to Israel, curses upon the Jews." Facing the Houthis' systematic pressure and ongoing violence, while caught in the crossfire of Yemen's ongoing civil war, the Jews of Sana'a and the Jews of Aden gradually left over the last decade. In 2013, following the murder of a Jewish man, 30 Jews departed Yemen. Throughout 2020 and 2021, the Houthis expelled 13 Jewish families from Sana'a. And so this brings us to 2025, where Libby Marhabi, Yemen's last remaining Jew, today languishes in Houthi prison in declining health. Former detainees report that Houthi prison officials have selectively mistreated and abused Libby, all for his being a Jew. He has repeatedly been withheld food and subjected to physical beatings, solitary confinement, electrical shocks, and hours-long interrogations. Over the last several years, both USERV and the State Department have repeatedly called for his release. Furthermore, like in Egypt, the Houthis have used the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel as a pretext for escalating its anti-Israel sloganeering, conveyed as anti-Semitic and extremist rhetoric. This anti-Jewish propaganda campaign is being pushed by top Houthi government officials. It is being taught in education curriculum and textbooks, and it is being broadcast on Houthi TV, which recently aired a children's cartoon casting Jews as treacherous with the intention of consolidating political and economic control of the world. And so this is the tragedy that befell the Jews of Yemen, which echoes that of the Jews of Egypt, both of which reflect the larger calamity of the near total destruction of once flourishing indigenous, centuries-old Jewish communities in the Middle East and North Africa. In closing, after having relitigated this history of MENA region Jews, I believe it is necessary to ask, and that it is critical for us in this room to answer, what does reconciliation possibly look like? It begins with acknowledging our moral imperative to preserve the story of Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. In seeking justice and accountability for historical wrongs, we must advocate that citizens of these countries today learn what happened in the lands where they live. In this effort, we avoid history repeating itself. We bring some modicum of dignity to the memory of these lost Jewish communities. We create a more durable bulwark against ongoing anti-Jewish intolerance. And we powerfully signal together that inflammatory and derogatory ideas about Jews and about all religious or belief communities have no purchase in the modern world. Again, thank you for this opportunity to speak on today's panel and bring light to the history and the current situation of Jews in the Middle East and North Africa. I truly look forward to continuing our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hilary. And because we're running a little short on time here, I'd like to change the format just a little bit, if my guests will agree to this. Let's do a little more Q&A here. That's what I do best, is do Q&A, interviews. So let me first introduce our next guest. Karmella Borashan is director of Susek Evangelistic Association, representative of the Assyrian International Council. Her advocacy work for the powerless and voiceless began in the 1980s, when she was actively involved in an Iranian women's organization focusing on advancing women's rights in Iran and supporting El Salvadorans during their civil war. Following the ISIS invasion of Iraq, she joined the Assyrian Aid Society of America as advocacy director and board member, working to support Assyrian Christians facing violence, displacement, marginalization. And over the years, she's engaged in advocacy efforts on international platforms, including the United Nations. And in Washington, D.C., she currently serves as the advocacy director of Susek Evangelistic Association, represents the Assyrian International Council. So please welcome Karmella Borashan. Centuries. The persecution of Assyrians has been going on for centuries. What is different now?
Thank you so much for the platform, Coptic Solidarity. And as you know, Assyrians have a history of 6,700 years. And they were one of the very first converts alongside of the people in that region. Armenians, Ethiopians, and Coptics, we all converted at the same time as the apostles traveled through that region. Since 7th century, the persecution started. And the persecution is the same as what we see right now in 21st century. Basically, nothing has changed. The mentality, the region has been taken over by the ISIS mentality that resided since 7th century in that region, pushing everybody out of there. And everybody that is not part of their own mental ideologies. And as you saw, and we all witnessed, and Assyrians in Iraq said ISIS is a new organization to the Western world, but we have seen it for centuries. They persecuted us. They said, this is an exact statement, you are Christians, you're supporting the Western world, so they killed us. They said, you're Christian, you're supporting Israel, they killed us. You're Christian, you support United States, they slaughtered us. And none of them stood by us. At this point, as you mentioned, we used to be 1.5 million Assyrians once in Iraq only. It has dwindled down to less than 300,000, and they are aligned to leave more due to the Islamization of minors in Iraq and land grabbing, which is a very common practice in Kurdistan region of Iraq. KRG, Kurdistan Regional Government, and the central government, they are fighting among themselves and regarding the demographic changes, land grabbing, Ryan Kaldani bringing Shebeks into the Nineveh plain. We are Ninevites. They're bringing Shebeks residing them, and Kurdistan government paying Kurds from Iran, Turkey, and Syria, bringing them in Nineveh plain and in Kirkuk and giving them voting powers. And they took our parliamentarian seats and putting proxies in there. And the most alarming is that ISIS mentality is growing.
Well, I wanted to ask you, let's look beyond Iraq. Let's look at Syria and what is happening there. So, someone told me that El Jalani is just a terrorist in a suit, wearing a necktie. He has said that he has renounced the past when he founded al-Nusra and the slaughter of Druze that occurred in 2015. He's renounced that. He's renounced his ties to al-Qaeda. But as we know, can a leopard really change his spots? So what does his ascension as the acting president or interim president, whatever you want to call him, and his HTS movement, what effect is that having on Assyrian Christians in Syria, and what do you see happening in the future?
Yeah, my colleague is going to cover that in more detail, but the situation in Syria is not any better than any other places. The jihad is called against Assyrians right now, the Christians of Syria, and the Assyrians also under AANES are under a lot of hardship. And if you allow me one more thing about Iraq, the curriculum in the history books teaches, reveres the person that slaughtered our patriarch Assyrians and our neighbors Yazidis. They're revering him, and that's what they're teaching right now. But that said, the most alarming is a neo-Nazi, Kurdish neo-Nazi organization with 1,000 known members is growing in KRG region. And we had an attack by them in our New Year parade in Duhok area, and both governments stayed silent. Our people very actively working with both governments. Unfortunately, the support of which is very good, the support of KRG for the patriarch, we respect that. However, 95% of the congregation is in diaspora. And people are leaving because their land is being grabbed. There are checkpoints. They are building brothels, very institutionalized and systematic brothels that, how do you say it? The women that sell themselves.
A brothel. Prostitution.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Prostitution. Even though the people in the Ankara are asking, stop this, this does not agree with our belief system, but systematically they're doing that because they want to dislodge the Assyrian Christians from Ankara. At the same token, Assyrians are populated in the northern region of even Kurdistan region, the mountain Nala. They are telling them, you guys need to move out of here because we're planning to build a dam, and they're forcing them. And the dam has not even been approved. But that said, they put checkpoints around, before Assyrian villages, and they're harassing them constantly. Discrimination in hiring, discrimination in paying salaries. In the north, there is a oligarchy running it. And the salaries, the budget that is allocated from central government goes to the government of KRG, and the oligarchy decides how that money is allocated. With that said, the government employees don't get paid sometimes for months. Even though central government has offered to directly deposit the money in their account, the oligarchy has stopped it.
So basically so what you're saying here is there is no support or little support from the government against these efforts to push the Assyrians out of the Nineveh Plain.
The Nineveh Plain and Kurdistan region.
And the whole Kurdistan.
The whole Kurdistan region. It's not better anywhere for us. Suppression of speech is very dominant. Amnesty International had a report that the Kurdistan region's prisons are full of journalists. And they're not only putting pressure on the people there, they even said people like I in diaspora need to stop talking in the DC and addressing the human rights violation. They're labeling me as anti-Kurd, or they are labeling me as pro-Iran, even though central government of Iraq also trying to put a stop on me when I speak at United Nations. So all of these, Kurdistan region is taking our archaeologies and putting them as their own archaeology. They're connecting themselves to the land in order to justify themselves for a statehood. And everything that is happening in Iraq, everywhere in Iraq, is these restrictions aligned with the United Nations definition of genocide in the UN Genocide Convention, Article 2C.
Well, I was going to ask you if you consider it genocide. What is happening?
It is very subtle ethnic cleansing that is covered really well. And a lot of Western world don't see it because they are protecting the patriarchs, and they say we are very tolerant for this religion, but we can see the Sharia law is being implemented by destruction of Assyrian alcohol shops and hate speeches in the mosques and everything else that follows after that.
So a different situation on the ground. Now, we'll find out about the Yazidis and what the latest is with them. Jamileh Naso is president of the Canadian Yazidi Association, an advocate for conflict-affected communities, focusing on justice, accountability, and long-term recovery. With an MBA in finance and sustainability and a background in political science and human rights, she bridges policy advocacy and community rebuilding. She's led national efforts on Yazidi resettlement, family reunification, and genocide recognition. Jamileh is part of the Operation Ezra, one of the world's largest private Yazidi sponsorship initiatives. She works with Canada's War Crimes Program to advance survivor-led justice. Please welcome Jamileh Naso. Jamileh, I touched on this briefly. We had 10,000 Yazidis, mostly women and children, that were kidnapped by ISIS in the 2014-2015 period. And 3,000, as many as 3,000 are still missing, these women. So what can you tell us about what is happening now on the ground?
Yeah, so the latest KRG report in terms of missing women and children, Yazidi women and children, is 2,970, and that report was released a few months ago. And in terms of what's happening on the ground right now, it's local Yazidi groups and individuals coming together to implement rescue operations. There is no coordinated international task force or task force led by the KRG or Baghdad. So it really is the community themselves now going out to try to rescue the missing women and girls at this point. We know we know where their locations are. We know the names of these women and children. Like in Canada, we sponsor quite a few Yazidi families, and I sit with these mothers and they show me photos of their kids and they say they're in this house, in this community, on this street, in this village in Iraq. And there's nothing we can do to get them because there's no political will on any fronts, internationally or domestically, to commence with rescue operations. So that's sort of the situation we're in right now in terms of rescue operations. We know it's possible. The U.S. just a few months ago rescued a young Yazidi woman from Gaza in coordination with the IDF, the Jordanians, and other diplomatic missions in the region. So we know that when the U.S. puts its political sort of power behind these types of operations, it is possible. We just we need more of it.
Well, maybe some rescued Yazidi women should go and meet with President Trump. I think that would probably get him behind it. So what about the U.S. State Department? We have a Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, very concerned about what is happening in the Middle East. Has there been an effort with him?
So kind of echoing a bit of what Karmella said about the suppression of voices of a lot of our communities in that region, to say, there's certain things you can't say, don't speak up, wait until we have our piece of the pie, wait until we're done our conversations, wait until we get billion-dollar oil and gas deals, wait till we get X, Y, and Z, and then maybe, if there's time, we'll have a prayer breakfast and we'll invite you and we'll say we're advancing religious minority rights in the Middle East and we're a safe haven for groups like yours. So it's a lot of marketing and nice words, and it's our communities are being left behind and we are being uprooted and we are on the brink of being extinct.
I saw a video on social media just the other day of a woman who had been reunited with her father. After 9 years. I can't imagine the suffering she's gone through, the terror, the trauma, and the family as well. But we thank God that they are reunited. So what is it going to take to reunite these girls, to rescue them, to reunite them, and to stand with the Yazidi community. Because we as Christians here, most of us, I believe we are Christian here, and of the Judaic faith, we want to see minorities protected. So what can be done?
Well, I'll just maybe start by telling you a little bit about how the Canadian Yazidi Association came to be and on our work in Canada, because that is directly related to that question. So in Canada, sort of prior, when ISIS was raiding Yazidi villages and towns, we were about 200 Yazidis in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and about, maybe 2,000 in Canada-wide. So we, small community, new community, we're first generation, so we came to Canada in 1999, so we were amongst the first sort of Yazidis to touch Canadian soil. So not a lot of connections, we're very young, we're not sure what's going on, so we start knocking on doors and saying, can anybody help us? Like, our community's facing genocide right now on all fronts. And after many doors in the face, the community that stepped up first was actually the Jewish community. And they promised us two things. One, to raise awareness about the plight of the Yazidis, and two, to help us privately sponsor Yazidis. So fast forward a few weeks and then years, we raised, a couple $1 million. We managed to privately sponsor 67 Yazidis. We have 20 applications on the go. And we've now to date sort of become this multi-faith coalition of Yazidis, Jews, Christians, businesses, synagogues, school divisions, everyday people from all walks of life who have come under this umbrella of nobody should be targeted because of their faith or what they believe or their religious background. So it was a grassroots sort of movement and response to a genocide happening on that part of the world. And I always say, the only reason we were able to get the recognition of genocide in Canada, to get the Canadian government to bring 1,200 Yazidi women and girls to the country, to save 67 Yazidis, is because of the coalition with the other faith groups across the country. So what we need is to do more of that. And I thank Coptic Solidarity for extending that partnership. And I'm so glad we've been able to connect and to learn more about what's going on with Copts in Egypt, and using these types of platforms and in any space any of us are in to highlight these issues and connect the dots, because we are indigenous to these communities and to these countries. And colonialism, although it's used in the West in different ways, we are all victims of colonialism in a way as well. So we need to start telling that story better and uniting under this one umbrella of we are stronger together and we deserve to live in peace and harmony in all of our real homelands.
I've got to say, the Yazidis I have met with in Iraq, very welcoming, warm and friendly people. They didn't, they knew I was a Christian. Sure, come on in. It didn't matter. So any other concluding remarks here from any of the panelists?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
In Iraq, erasure by inaction, basically, in Iraq. With a bird's eye view that we gave, very brief. The details are available if anybody interested. Article 125 of Iraq's constitution calls for Nineveh Plain Governorate. And also we have a Sinjar Governorate for Yazidis. We have asked, our people have asked for that. It's been 20 years. I'm not sure what Iraqi government is waiting. They're creating all kind of governorates, but they're ignoring Yazidis and Christian Assyrians in that region.
Why is that?
I don't think they want us there because of our faith and ethnicity. With that said, we have requested time with Secretary of State, but now that we are united, we are going to go forward as a united indigenous Christians of the region. We have to have a loud voice in this in Washington. And Washington, D.C. is a heartbeat and the power of the world. And knowing that this new administration has more sensitivity toward Christians in Middle East, this probably will be a better platform if the opportunity given to us, because they have to put KRG and central government under pressure that these people need to be saved in the country. No more lip service. There is a lot of lip service. As my colleague mentioned, there's a lot of show, but there is no real voice that is being heard. The prayer breakfast was a tinted glass in Erbil. This wasn't really a prayer breakfast. This was, we want statehood. We're protecting the Christians. So United Nations and Western world, we need to have your support. We just need a jolt. We're not beggars. We're not looking for empathy. We're looking for a jolt for us. We can stand on our feet. Thank you.
Okay, folks, you've heard it from our distinguished panelists this morning. We need to be praying. But beyond that, what good is prayer without action? We need to do both. So it's up to groups like this to be a voice for these that they represent. So let's thank the panelists today this morning. And thank you.